The data is now out, both from UN agencies as well as organizations like ours, that small-scale farmers are actually more productive if they are allowed to be more productive. The UN data shows that 70% of the food people eat comes from small farms. So they should be the center of our thinking about food policy. Navdania's work, the movement that I started in India, has shown that the more you intensify ecologically and biologically, which you can only do on small farms, the more nutrition per acre you produce. And we've evolved this as an indicator for health per acre. But we've also now evolved new indicators called wealth per acre. How much goes back to the farmer? The reason small-scale farmers are poor are, first, they've been displaced by cities. They've been uprooted by development projects and by wars. And today they are farming on the most marginal soils and lands with no support whatsoever. You have to look at human beings. When children don't get enough nourishment, they become dwarfs. In India, half the children without food their size is shrinking literally. How do you expect marginalized soils and marginalized people to be able to do enough? So the first is the right of everyone to fertile land, which is today being buried under concrete. Today, the most fertile soils are decimated by war. But the second very important issue, and this is particularly the case under conditions of globalization, which have even further manipulated an exploitative agriculture system, because now global companies are trapping farmers for seed and chemicals, increasing the costs of farming. Farmers aren't able to eat what they grow because they have to pay the debt for the chemicals. And that's why half of the hungry people of the world are farmers, because they're being pushed out of the food system. They're being pushed into the toxic system and out of the food system. No wonder they're hungry. And then when they actually grow something, these globalization rules are designed to turn everything into a commodity and buy cheap from farmers and sell it at high prices on speculation. So the whole food system is being manipulated to maximize the profits of the big corporations at the top, whether it's the seed companies, the chemical companies, or the agribusiness companies, and crush the farmer at the bottom. And you can be in the remotest village today. This system is affecting you. So the way to address the hunger and poverty of the small farmer is to make a shift to ecological sustainability and fair trade, to make a shift from control over the seed by corporations, control over food by corporations, to seed sovereignty and food sovereignty. And I don't say these as empty words, because this is what we've done for the last 3 decades, and it works. Must have been mid-80s, the FAO asked me to do a study on women farmers in India. And even I came in for a shock. I've worked with women peasants, with Chipko, the movement, to come and hug the trees. And yet the figures really shook me up too, that most farmers are women. But when we see advertisements, we see a man on a tractor. We see a man spraying pesticide on a field. So women have been made invisible in agriculture. But they are the heart and soul of agriculture. Agriculture, after all, is an area of specialization that women have had from the beginnings of agriculture. All archaeological records show that women were the first domesticators of crops. And they carry this 10,000-year knowledge and skill of seed. They carry the knowledge and skill of nutrition. They carry with them the knowledge and skill of how, in the worst of circumstances, to be resilient, to make your ecosystems resilient, your own lives resilient, and your communities resilient. So the first thing we have to do for women farmers is make visible their expertise and what they contribute. I think the second thing we need to do, and we need to recognize this, is if women aren't recognized and women aren't valued for the contributions they make to growing food and feeding people, you will see the violence against women intensify and accelerate. And as Pope Francis said, our biggest crisis is the acceptance of disposability of people, the globalization of indifference, as he called it. So we need to not just recognize women's contribution, but empower them and put them at the center, because they are more efficient farmers, they are more knowledgeable, they are more hardworking. They get up early morning, sleep late at night. For them, nothing is too hard to do. And we need that to be the leadership that shapes a new paradigm of agriculture, so no child goes hungry, no woman is brutalized. With all my work on the Green Revolution, it became very clear that local seeds are not inferior. It's just that corporations would like to control the seed and have created this vocabulary of primitive seed and improved seed and elite cultivars and primitive cultivars, totally a cultural imposition. And then in '87, I was at a meeting with the same chemical companies that had brought us Bhopal, and 1984 was the year of the Bhopal disaster. They now wanted to control the seed through doing genetic engineering, claiming a patent, owning the seed, creating international laws. That's when I decided I would save seeds, and I started Navdanya. But I also realized that the way they are appropriating the seed is not by bringing a better seed and leaving farmers to experiment with it, choose it, having governments evaluate it for safety, especially GMOs for their biosafety impact. They were basically manipulating laws and policies. So while I realize it is an imperative to save the seeds, grow ecological agriculture, show that it's doable, train farmers. We've trained more than 700,000 farmers in these many years. Set up markets that work for the farmer and markets that don't crush the farmer. It was very, very important to keep an eye on the law and policy framework. On patenting, what really shocked me was this idea that corporations can put a toxic gene into a plant through genetic engineering and then claim they've invented the plant. They've invented not just the plant, they've invented future generations, that they can own creation. And I sometimes say GMO for them means God move over. We will now take over, collect rents from the reproduction of life, and for me, it's an absolute ethical and epistemic and ecological outrage. So that's what drove me to save seeds. We managed to put in our patent laws that biological systems are not invented, that creation is not an invention. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't worked at national level. At global level, after all, the players we are dealing with that are destroying seed sovereignty and food sovereignty, the 5 global seed companies now and the 5 global trade companies, the seed companies and the Monsantos wrote the intellectual property laws of WTO. The Cargills wrote the agriculture trade laws. These are corporate monopoly laws. And every country is facing the impact. So I travel globally because I realize the issue of the farmer in India is the same issue of the farmer in Africa. So I will travel for solidarity to support the movements in Africa. Same issue for farmers of Canada. After all, you too have laws requiring compulsory registration that are on the table. Or United States, where the state of Vermont managed to get a labeling law for GMOs, and now they're being sued by the corporations on this new crazy ground that corporations are persons and human beings, and the ability to influence our decisions is their freedom of speech, that if people know what's in the food they're eating, then the freedom of speech of a corporation is being taken away. And so I'm there to help them. I'm there to help them when local seed libraries and seed banks are declared illegal because they are providing an alternative. Or I'm in Europe with the European parliamentarians when there was an attempt to pass laws that would make local seed and diversity illegal. And I worked with the parliamentarians, I made inputs, I did caravans. So whatever I have to do for the integrity of creation, the freedom of people, the dignity of work in food production, I'm going to do it. Not only do I have deep respect for them, I don't think there's any community that contributes as much to society as farmers does. So they are what we call in India annadatas, the ones who provide us with food. And what is more basic than food? And they do it with such hard work. Show me anyone else who will work in the hottest of sun, pouring rain, freezing winter, with no resources, and keep putting themselves at the service of nature, the service of the earth, and service of society. There's no other community, and that's why I really, if I have two projects in my life, one is to save the integrity and freedom of seed and its diversity. And that's why we create these conservation centers, and we rescue thousands of varieties of seed and put them to use, not as museums. And the second is to bring dignity to farming. And I feel so happy that in these decades of work, now there's a younger generation coming to agriculture with pride. The reason the profession has been labeled with lack of dignity is two very false stories. One, a linear story of history. First we did farming, then we had industry, now we have service. And nothing needs to be produced, we all need to sit at computers. We don't have to eat, we don't have to have manufacturing, service economy. But we will always need to eat. And in fact, the better your farming, the more peaceful your society. The better your farming, the more overall development in your society. And this is where so much of my work has been focused. And the second reason there's indignity is because the system has been designed to push farmers into deeper and deeper poverty. My mother educated us on what she earned from farming. My father was a very senior government official. He didn't earn as much as a salary as my mother could, because everything was designed for the farmers at that point of history in India. Today, everything is designed to exploit the farmers. The farmers are in a negative economy. They spend more, earn less, they're all in debt, they're leaving the land. That's why the family farm is disappearing. And if they do earn something, it is so measly you can't survive. I've done analysis on potato chips. 2% of the price of a potato chip goes to the farmer who produced the potato. The rest goes to the Pepsis and the Lays. And that's the case for every product. As the system gets vertically integrated, seed to agriculture to processing to retail and global distribution, the value addition moves upwards to corporate hands, and it's sucked out from the farmer and the earth. Why do I feel hopeful? I feel hopeful because in the 3 decades of working on ecological agriculture, working on saving seed, we are seeing more food grow. We are seeing more farmers come out of poverty. We are seeing hunger reduced. We are seeing more nutrition available. And because it's possible, if more places do it, we will have more nourishment and food for everyone. So when I see the reality of how working with the earth and an agriculture of peace is the way to feed the world, I feel very hopeful. But even when I look at that dominant system of industrial agriculture, I don't feel hopeless. The reason I don't feel hopeless is that system of agriculture is based on such false claims about feeding the world. It's based on hiding so much of the costs. It is based on keeping alive war chemicals in the food system. Chemical fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, they were all first designed as war machinery. And therefore, industrial agriculture really is an agriculture of war. When I did my study on the Punjab to understand why violence had grown in Punjab in the 80s, that's what I realized. The reason there's violence is because the paradigm comes out of violence. In Syria, there's violence because the system of non-sustainable farming made agriculture more vulnerable. 2009 drought, 800,000 people displaced, 75% food production wiped out, 85% livestock wiped out, unsustainable societies. They moved to the city, they were arrested, relatives equipped themselves, the fight started between the rebels and Assad. The Western countries thinking they're super smart, assisted the rebels. Through the arms, we get an ISIS, and the whole system grows into deeper violence. That's no model for agriculture. It's a model for war. Worse, the war against the earth. If 75% of the destruction is taking place in a system which is only getting us 30% of the food, if we go further that path, suppose we go 45%. Suppose we give them the benefit of doubt and say, okay, they might reach 45% of the food supply, but they'll have killed the planet, and you can't grow food on a dead planet. So I don't feel hopeless because they're making sure the earth is going to decide that they get wiped out. Well, you know, Canada has always been a very important factor in global solidarity. And even though the government policies don't think that much about global solidarity at this point, I think the citizens of Canada still have that heart, that generous heart to know we are one earth community, we are one human community. And therefore, whatever we do to the last person far away, we do to ourselves. I believe that nothing more important than protecting and defending the seed, both because it is our duty to protect life on earth, as well as seed sovereignty is the basis of food sovereignty. You don't have your own seed, there's no way you're going to be able to do an agriculture that's ecological. You don't have your own seed, there's no way you will build local food systems. And there are major imperatives why we have to go local. The first is to support local farmers and create food communities so that the farmer and those who eat what the farmer produces become one activity in continuum. Because the web of life is a food web, and we need to start seeing ourselves much more in terms of relationships than in terms of fragmentation. But there's a second reason why the local has become so important, and that has to do with the fact that the globalized food system is not just assaulting the planet, it's not just uprooting small farmers, it is producing food that has become a curse for our bodies. The only way to be sure you're eating safe food that's good for your children and good for you is local. That's why going local, going ecological, developing seed sovereignty and food sovereignty here in Canada reinforces seed sovereignty and food sovereignty that allow the poor to feed themselves in Africa, in India, in Latin America. And seed sovereignty is freedom to save and exchange seed. It is freedom of the seed to evolve in the future. Food sovereignty is the right to grow your own food and the right to know how your food was grown.